Good afternoon. By show of hands, who would say they have a good understanding of the BBC? Then why would they need a new proposition? Let's just hold that thought. Is that we're talking about one of the biggest brands in the world, one of the most infamous brands in the world that's been developed over a very long time, as we'll go on to. Why would they need a new proposition right now? I feel very blessed to be up here with the BBC and with Emily because I'm a BBC baby. My parents met at the BBC. One of them was in the news. The other one was in sport. He was a commentator. So I feel like I'm genetically designed to talk. So it is a real honor. And I'll pass over to Emily to give us the context.
Great. Thank you, Oscar. And hi, it's really lovely to be here. Yeah, so the BBC has been around for a really long time. It's a media brand that's really embedded in the psyche of our nation and with millions of people around the world. We're the world's largest public service broadcaster, and BBC Studios is the UK's most awarded production company. Our programming is enjoyed by, listen to this, 90% of UK adults every week. And on a monthly cycle, it goes up to almost 100% of UK adults. And our content is enjoyed by audiences everywhere. We are also the world's most trusted news source, with 1 billion or over 1 billion monthly visits to our news site every month. So, of course, this is all great, right? No problems. But the media landscape is changing massively and rapidly. There's been a huge explosion in media platforms and outlets, a divergence in audience viewing habits and where they're consuming their media. We see it all the time, an increasing polarization of views, and this ongoing debate about the licence fee funding and the relevancy of the BBC, not to mention that the BBC is actually often the headlines itself. So there's lots of challenging things that make this an interesting backdrop for our employer brands. So in the BBC's 102-year history, we've had an employer branding team for less than 2 of those years. And honestly, we've never really needed one in the past. If you worked in media, probably especially if you worked in media in London, then you probably wanted to work at the BBC. And that itself is part of the problem. But before we get to the solution, we're going to take you back to the start of the journey. I hope this works.
We're on air in 5, 4.
BBC One.
Well, defining the BBC's role involves answering the central question, what is public service broadcasting?
It literally means provide...
Boring!
Let me rephrase that.
The BBC
Has something
For everyone!
everyone.
that includes you.
Caroline and John from Cornwall.
So the question is,
What do you want?
how about
A full throttle tango.
Or
A high-ranking corrupt police officer. With a soft centre.
Or
Do you require assistance?
Think about the square root of 350,000 litres of milk.
what about banger of the...
Banger.
But there's more to it than that.
the BBC is
A unique experiment.
There's no angle, there's
No bias vibes.
no sponsors.
Interfering with play.
It's a bridge.
between us?
Kind of a common ground.
Look a bit closer.
It's a reflection.
Of who we are. But here's the thing.
The BBC
Doesn't have to be here. It only exists.
If we really believe
It matters.
we're in it together, aren't we? Let's do this.
Come here.
The BBC.
There's something that belongs to all of us. Every one of us.
Every one of us.
It's good, isn't it? It gives me goosebumps still, anyway. Yeah, this is our BBC. This is the absolute essence of the BBC brand. It is owned by us all, the British people, and it is ours. So this is a really strong and really compelling corporate brand. But what about when we sort of translate that, extend that into our employer brand message? This is our BBC. Actually, it feels a little bit exclusive. It actually sort of reinforces that idea, that perception that the BBC is an exclusive place to be. Like it's ours, and therefore it's not really yours, and maybe there's no place here for you. So, as a corporate brand, it really unites and it's a call to action. But as an employer brand, it actually excludes a little bit, and that is the opposite of what we need it to do. And I'm sure, like everybody in this audience, we are no longer recruiting from our traditional talent pools. We're probably competing for the same talent as all of the rest of you. That idea that, you think media, you think BBC, it's actually just no longer relevant. And surprise, surprise, the main growth areas of our business are in software development, data, digital, and technology. I'm going to mention another couple of sort of big strategic considerations when we're looking at our employer brands. One is our across the UK strategy. That is a commitment that we've made to invest primarily in locations outside of London, so Salford, Birmingham, Newcastle, Belfast, Cardiff, and Glasgow, will be our main growth locations. And the second is our public commitment to diversity, where we've committed to a workforce of 50-50 male-female, 20% BAME, 12% disabled, and 25% low SED workforce. So we've got to attract new skills in new locations with this really constant focus on diversity. And this is something that's really apparent at the BBC at the moment, every day, actually, that we've got to move fast in this environment in order to succeed. We've had a lot of years where our sort of success, our place in the market has been guaranteed. And that's in the employment market as well as the media market. And now we're having to compete for that place.
There are three things that we want to show today. The first is how we built and what we built as a new brand platform. We're not calling it EVP. We can talk about that later. The second then is how we started to get that out into the world of attracting the right kind of people in and a little bit of internally. And then finally was making sure that we reached a different kind of talent, the talent groups that we just spoken about.
Yeah. So we started off by establishing our current position as an employer internally and externally. I think some interesting things that come out of this research that was done. 96% of people know the BBC. That is massive brand awareness. In places that I've worked in the past, I could only dream of having a brand awareness that high. It also makes me wonder who the other 4% were actually who didn't know who the BBC are. But of those 96% of people who know the BBC, 61% of people have actively sort of decided that the BBC is not a place for them. And I'm going to bet that a lot of those are the ones from those sort of talent pools that we really want to engage with. This might be something, or a form of this will be familiar to a lot of you. We have a lot of stuff already in the BBC that we need to bring together. We have our really strong corporate brand that we've already spoken about. We have our purpose to inform, educate, and entertain audiences. We have 6 values pillars. We have 4 workplace pillars. We actually have loads of other pillars as well that didn't make it onto this slide, but it gives you a sort of snapshot of the messaging framework that we're trying to work within without overly complicating it even more. And this slide for me, this sort of represents what I think is a big and sort of underestimated challenge for our employer brands. By design, the BBC is everything to everyone. That's what it is here to do. So we're making cartoons for children, we're making cutting-edge music shows, we're making rolling news headlines. We've got a charity, we've got local radio stations, we've got a commercial production company, we've even got an entire symphony orchestra in the BBC. So it's really challenging to find a sort of common story to tell across all of these different brands and all of these different cultures as well.
And that's where we came in.
Yeah, so I've given you, like, as a good client, I've given you all the problems,
all
Oscar,
the context.
and now I need you to solve it.
Yeah,
Thanks.
It was relatively intimidating getting a call from the BBC saying, hey, can you do some creative work? But the way that we approached it, if I can get a little drum roll on laps, in classic brand fashion, we added a Y. And that's like, the biggest problem there is when people talk about employer brand and marketing, and my friends sort of critique and be like, what do you actually do? It's like some genius in Wise has sort of sat down and went, what if we just add a Y and make it your? It's very, very simple. And that's why we don't feel comfortable calling it an EVP. And we'll talk about more of what it is. But just by that change, we move from our to your. It's inclusive, it feels like it gives us a sense of ownership, and really importantly, it's all about the people. And it allows us to flex. We would call that a brand platform. So instead of an EVP, this is the sort of foundations then that allows us to build something very, very broad and flex it to everyone. Because the BBC, as you said, truly is something different for everyone. You can see what this kind of looks like now when we start to personalize it. This is Jeff's BBC. This is Molly's BBC. It gives us the flexibility to start giving some different kind of like graphical assets and accents around which kind of talent that we're speaking to. When we're speaking to talent that's more digital or tech focused, we'll have some code in the background with an easy frame. We can animate, we can add this, the yaw wherever we want to. It just gave like a very good, flexible parameters for us to start talking to talent. And then importantly, you needed to know how to use it.
Yeah, so we have an employer brand book. We have assets that are ready to go, that are easy to find, that are easy to download, and guidelines on how people can use them. I'm going to say that they're used internally every day by thousands of people is a push. I'm saying, like, if they're used by 10 people in a week, I'd be really happy with that. But, this is the journey that we are on. But the point here is we are a team of 3 people in employer branding in an organization of 22,000 people. So we need to get an army behind us in order to promote the BBC as an employer.
And so they can use it. And that would be my sort of first pit stop for you, is that if you're doing any kind of work like this on employer brand, on EVP, is how do your people have access to it? If it sits within people, if it sits within HR, if it sits within talent, it will only be used by those teams. So one of the first things that you need to do is get it out internally so that everyone feels like they have the tools to be able to make it their own. And this brand platform really did give people the ability or the feeling that they can make it their own. As you can sort of see here, this for me is so simple, but unmistakably the BBC. One of the first places as well that we went to then was the career site. So 73% of candidates will go to your career site to get an understanding of whether you're a good employer and whether you're a great place to work. If your career site does not look like the assets that you put out into market, people will drop off. And if your career site does not look like you are a great employer or has all of the work that you put in, then you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot before you've even begun. So this is number one place for where we'd go. And as my second pit stop is that creativity, it doesn't need to be Shakespeare. Like the world that we're operating in isn't consumer brand and Coke where we need to work in AR in the metaverse. What we need to create is something that is really, really functional that works for your business. So that was the first part. Then we needed to get it out into the world. One of the first places that, and first asks was about driving digital hires within Newcastle. And we were like, perfect. It's local, it's niche. Let's put our brand platform to the test. So when you're going about this, is that the candidate journey, it is not linear. When you run any kind of attraction campaign, people aren't going to go from one asset or one ad that you put out across social and then immediately imply. I don't know if anybody has ever sort of read anything about sales and sales techniques, but on average, it takes about 8 touch points for anybody during the sales process to buy. Think of your candidates exactly the same way. What is the message that they're seeing at each different touch point, and how is it consistent? They might see an advert, they might follow you on social, they go to your career site, and then finally they apply via your job board. So when you're going out to attract, it's important that you have a framework that allows you to work with that. So different assets at different times. And if you don't have a framework, steal ours. At the top, for awareness, which is one of the biggest phase, awareness is your big, sexy creative. You're like really polished, the video that you've spent a lot of money on and spent a lot of hours on creating, or that UGC content that you think tells your story really, really well. That's your big bit at the top. Consideration needs to be a bit more of a direct message. That's your paid campaign. I'm speaking to you. We know that you've seen that video we've been watching. Now I need you to apply. Community is something that we added into this step that we'll talk about in a second. But application, that's when you're retargeting with a way more direct message. So let me just show you what that looks like. Awareness for this campaign to drive digital hires within Newcastle was about the work that the BBC has been doing to innovate over the past 50 years. CFAX, believe it or not, was crazy when it came out compared to what people were usually working with. Now, iPlayer has over 13 million views a week, which is the numbers. If you're a tech or in the product world, the scale and the impact that you can have is astronomical. So that was the big, sexy message at the top. Then was a more direct, using our tools, we want you. Finally, then, once we know people have gone through that candidate journey, we're retargeting them with something very, very clear. Join us. As a bit of interactivity, we stress test. Did anyone know Stephen Bartlett, the Diary of a CEO? Yeah, loads of nods. Crazy. He's done an amazing job there. He tests his thumbnails. He tests 60 of them. Every time that he releases a new podcast episode, slight tweaks, slight different picture to see which ones perform. If you're not testing your content, then you're putting all of your eggs into one basket and you are hoping that that is the message that talent want to see. So when we go out to campaigns, we do exactly the same thing. Well, the top one here, exactly the same image, exactly the same platform. This is your BBC, but just 2 different kinds of text. The first one is all about the impact that you can have. Your skills, be part. On this one is all about our teams, our Newcastle Tech Hub, our tech hub in Newcastle. Which do you think perform best? Can I get a raise of hands for candidate impact?
I should know.
Can I get a raise? You're not allowed to. If you get it wrong, so we're stuffed. Raise your hand for BBC Teams. A lot of people have no idea or no contribution. For your first set, you are absolutely right. That invitation caused a massive amount more impressions and a better click-through rate of 30% than the other set. We would love to say that this is science and we knew that this was going to happen beforehand. We didn't. Like, that's the importance of testing that message. But when I think back to the work that we've done on the brand platform, I think that makes sense. Is what we're talking about is your BBC, that sense of ownership. Like, of course, that invitation to talent would perform better. So the next pit stop is talent want to be invited. Don't necessarily talk about what you've got going on. Talk about why you want them and the skills that they can bring. Woo! Fab. So now that we've externally started to get the message out, we know that the platform works, then we went for a slightly different challenge. Speaking to the stat and the ambitions of where the BBC wanted to go, we ran a campaign which was all about amplifying voices, because the BBC truly is a world-class employer for deaf, disabled, and neurodivergent talent. Probably one of the best in the UK that you can get in terms of the skills and the care that goes alongside the actual request for the role. So this is some of the assets that we created. Again, your big sexy one, which is about a video, very people-focused, all about the stories. And we've made sure that all of the assets were very, very human. Instead of talking about the impact that I want to make stats-wise, humans, like people love people stories. And the feedback that we got, my favorite, is down here. As a disabled job seeker, I feel really emboldened by opportunities like this. As our good friend Mary would say, now I'm into it, I want more. So we did it again. And we produced this video.
My experience in coming to the BBC as a neurodivergent person was initially fear.
The BBC is not
She's so great. The one thing that I really wanted to show for that video is that there was a BSL interpreter as part of that. Personally, I have not seen any piece of employer branding content do that, ever. So when you're going out to a specific section of the community or a specific talent pool, is you have to be conscious of things like that, and there's a lot that we can learn from the consumer brand world that we can pull into this. That for us was a first, and it's something that I think should be done way more. Remember me? We're back to the attraction framework. What did round 2 look like? We had this big video of awareness, consideration again, spoke to those human stories, and then finally, what we wanted to create was a talent pool here, because we wanted people that were part of that demographic to be interested in the BBC so that when the right roles came out, it's not about positive discrimination, it's about building awareness and then offering up those roles into that community. And the people truly were the stars of the show. They were amazing. And also, really interestingly, we never really produce a video that's that's more than 60 seconds. It's bad practice. Our attention spans are gone. Thank you, TikTok. But for this, the video is actually 2.5 minutes long. And that's because some of the talent and some of the people that we shot physically couldn't speak faster, and it would be a real disservice and discredit to cut those stories down. And we're really, really proud to say that that worked, and people watched the video. One big question that we wanted to sort of finish with is around whether, I'm pressing very, very slowly, whether we'd made a real impact, of whether we had changed perceptions of the BBC from across the UK. Hold that thought. Again, when we ran this campaign, the feeling that you get both internally from people commenting and externally was magic. The stats speak for themselves. We had nearly 400,000 views of the video. We got 500 participants to 5 webinars and 980 prospective candidates within Salford.
It's now over 1,000.
It's now over 1,000 in Salford. Where we're fishing is not a huge pond. So I think that not just the quality, but the directness of the message and the directness of the call to action was really powerful here. And in terms of the impact that we've had on the candidate pool in general and the talent pool, is that we've now managed to bump up by nearly double, not quite, but nearly double, the average number of deaf, disabled, and neurodivergent talent coming to the BBC in general. So, did we make an impact? Yes, we did make an impact. We've increased the 10% trust in the employer brand across the UK. 8%, nearly 9%, believe the BBC is a more inclusive employer. And we have an increase in 15% in likelihood to work for the BBC. If you're wondering how do we get these stats, please speak to Adam, who's in the black hoodie just there. We have a tool called Wisdom that tracks the perception of your employer brand over time.
It's also just had a really positive impact internally, that campaign. And we have what's called an extend scheme, which is ring-fence roles for people who identify as deaf, disabled, neurodivergent. And it's really led to people being more aware and looking to ring-fence more and more roles that we can offer to this community. So it's sort of, it's feeding itself now as well.
Full circle.
Yeah.
And so my word of advice for this, it's very tempting when you have a shiny new platform or a shiny new EVP to go for it, to sort of say, we're going to activate, we're going to put it all over social, we're going to do a big bang campaign, whereas actually, where can that make the most impact? Because in our world, budget is not unlimited. We don't have a great pool that we can keep pulling from and working on it. So if you're not tracking properly, then that's where people usually fall down. As a Birmingham relevant GIF, I was going to do an accent, but I'm just not going to do that. Isn't it wonderful how time changes everything?
I'm not doing it either.
Any final thoughts?
No.
No. Thank you so much. I'm Oscar, lead client strategy at Wiser, and Emily.
Thank you.